October 2016, a large botnet brought down Dyn, an internet provider that supported Netflix, among other large streaming services. Botnets, they're nothing new. They've been used to target companies and then extort fees to get the attacks to stop. Basically, a denial-of-service attack works by sending a website or server requests and then not following up with the typical responses, so that the server is constantly opening up more and more requests, and it can't handle any new requests from legitimate users trying to access the site. Obviously, one computer can't send all those requests, so a distributed denial-of-service attack used compromised computers all over the world target a specific target, flooding it with requests. And yes, content delivery networks, they can shift the address of the server to mitigate these attacks. That's not what's important here. Here, the DDoS attack against Dyn came from ordinary street and home surveillance cameras. The Mirai botnet used a vulnerability in a white-labeled chip that was sold in white-label home surveillance cameras. White label in this case means that someone produced the camera and then others bought it and put their name on it. This is a story about white label devices that are in your organizations and why it's important to identify them before it's too late. I'm Robert Famosi. This is Error Code.
So hi there, everybody. My name is Rob King. I am the Director of Applied Security Research at runZero. And runZero is in my personal opinion, the world's greatest exposure management platform, vulnerability discovery platform, vulnerability management platform, and asset discovery. We really do, and I've been doing this a long time, we really do the best asset discovery in the world. We really do the best exposure management in the world. It's super neat, free to try, runzero.com/try.
If I haven't mentioned it before, Sector is one of my favorite security conferences. It's held every year in Toronto, and it's been under the radar, yet it attracts some of the best presentations from around the world. I always look forward to it. Rob, his talk at Sector on white labels was really good. So perhaps we should start with Rob's definition of what it is when we talk about a white label device.
It might be a surprise to some people, but most of the time, for some types of technology, when you buy it, the brand that's on the label is not who made it. The example I always like to give is essentially every microwave oven sold in North America, regardless of the brand, General Electric, Sears, Whirlpool, Insignia, whatever, they're all made in the same factory in Guangdong. So they just come out of the factory, a retailer puts their label on it, puts a fancy brand on it, and then sells it. And that's really true with things like security cameras. Security cameras are extremely commoditized. So, for example, if you look at a company like Lorex or even Honeywell, their cameras are actually made by Dahua. So Dahua is a Chinese company, and I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. It's Dahua. There we go. Still saying it wrong, but less wrong. And they make cameras for tons of different vendors: Honeywell, Lorex, ActiveCam, Amcrest, Ikegami, Hiltron, KB Vision. All these different cameras. When you buy them, you're really buying a Dahua camera.
So when I hear Rob talk about surveillance cameras, I'm immediately going back to the Mirai botnet and the fact that a vulnerability in a white label camera propagated through a whole bunch of systems, allowing the botnet to take over. It's kind of an extreme example, but something like that could happen with these devices as well.
Certainly, and there was one, and it wasn't one of the ones I just named, but we did have an interesting example of one of these cameras that recommended that you download a root signing certificate from the camera and install it across your organization so that your traffic to the camera was encrypted and secure, right? And never mind, you could also use that certificate to spoof any website in the world. So a little bit of a potential backdoor there.
The thrust of Rob's talk was more on the legality of having certain devices in your organization, because there are certain devices that are now banned by various federal and state and provincial governments.
Dahua was one of the big ones named. Also, Hikvision, which some people say High K Vision. I think it's Hikvision, but either way, I've heard it both ways. But those devices are banned by the United States federal government in any situation where it could be considered a secure environment, so observing federal buildings or installed in, organizations, installed in locations where federal data is processed, that sort of thing. And then a lot of state governments also have that ban. And in fact, a lot of state and local governments in the United States will base their own technology lists on the federal government's list. So it tends to be banned just about everywhere. And then in Canada, same sort of thing. There's a federal ban across all of Canada for certain vendors. And then also several individual provinces, Quebec especially, have banned certain devices and certain vendors for security reasons, for national security reasons.
So I want to dive into this whole idea of how Rob discovers these devices. If I buy a microwave and it says Amana on it or something, deep down inside, that's probably not the case. It's actually mass-produced somewhere else in the world. It's white label. Well, the same with a network router. Let's talk a little bit about the discovery and how Rob goes about finding these.
There's lots of little telltale signs, and I love, I got into this industry because I just love dissecting protocols and fingerprinting devices, and this is not a joke. I really love doing this. I would do it even if I wasn't getting paid. I'm very lucky that I get paid to do it. So there's lots of little bits and bobs on these devices that if you know what to look for, you can kind of tell. Sometimes they'll just straight up tell you. Like if you go to, if you open up one of these cameras or devices or whatever in your web browser, it'll say somewhere in the corner like, oh, it's Hikvision, right? Or, oh, it's Dahua. But most of the time, they're not quite that obvious, right? And in fact, what you'll often see with these things is that they're almost unusually, almost pathologically generic. Like you can go to their web interface and there's literally no mention of a brand. There's no copyright message. There's nothing. It's just, this very generic username, password, login prompt. But that genericity is still common across all of them. So you can say, oh, I can, it's really fun at parties. I can look at a random camera web interface and be like, oh, actually that's a Hikvision. And that's, like I said, fun at parties. But you can also look at little individual protocol quirks, which I think are fun. So, for example, a lot of times these devices will register a name with DNS. So if you have an environment where you're getting an IP address or whatever via DHCP, and you can do dynamic DNS, it'll say, oh yeah, the host name is Hikvision-1732 or whatever. So it's pretty telling that, oh, I thought that was a Honeywell camera. No, it's actually the Hikvision. And then you also have, some obvious stuff as well, like MAC addresses. So every device in the world, almost, there's a million people in the audience saying, actually, okay, there's MAC addresses are the hardware addresses of these devices, right? They're supposed to be unique across all devices. And they're maintained, that uniqueness is maintained by manufacturers asking for blocks of MAC addresses from the management authority, which is the IEEE. And so you could just go and look at the MAC address and then go look up the vendor, which is based on the prefix, and it'll say, oh, it's actually, Dahua Technology Co. Limited, right? Which is always fun. So there's some really obvious things, and then there's also some more subtle things.
And among the more subtle things, he talked about how he uses even the documentation.
Yes, which is always fun. At one point, I had a slide where I had a side-by-side comparison of the documentation from Dahua for one of their network video recorders, and then one from Monteview. And it's very much like, hey, can I copy your homework? Okay, but don't make it obvious. And so there's, the blue is a slightly lighter shade of blue, and the model numbers are slightly different, but it's the exact same, the exact same page, the exact same documentation. more or less. Just the logo's changed, which is always interesting. And then sometimes the documentation is also aggressively generic, where they don't even mention the name of the product. They're just like, "Thank you for buying my network video recorder." It's like, which one did I buy? I don't know. Always useful there.
So in Rob's presentation, he also talked about login screens and how you know just by looking at the login screen what the manufacturer truly is.
But then, and then sometimes they will put the logo there, right? They'll say, "Oh, it's an Intel Bras or Hikvision," of course. That's one of the obvious ones. But then even some of the subtle stuff if you go look at the source for the login page, you can say view source, which for those of us of a certain age, that's how we learned how to write HTML, was viewing source. It almost felt like, am I breaking the law if I view the source of this web page back in 1996? But you can go and look, and there'll just be like, hikvision.js or something like that. And so it becomes obvious there as well if you just even peek a little bit behind the curtain. And then also looking at just the HTTP headers. So, when you talk to these systems, the system will send back HTTP headers saying, "Oh, my server is whatever." And the server for Hikvision cameras is often a web server called Hikvision Web Server. So regardless of what kind of camera you've got, if it's running Hikvision Web Server, you can be relatively assured that it is a Hikvision camera.
So right now we're talking about a very specific example, but if you're running critical infrastructure, or you're running a utility or a factory, you have thousands of these devices. So how do you begin that discovery process to find out what you actually have on your network?
I would recommend that you get runZero. It is truly quite useful. You can search for, all these different. First off, we'll do the fingerprinting for you. Then you can say, "Hey, please show me any Dahua cameras or Hikvision cameras." Here's we even have a built-in query for different vendors and devices banned under various regulatory regimes. So it'll just pop up on your dashboard and say, "Hey, by the way, here's all these, Hikvision devices." But if in a bout of peak, you just decide you can't possibly use runZero, but you should, but you just want to be recalcitrant, I would recommend starting to look through your inventory using the discovery protocols for these devices themselves. A lot of them will have proprietary protocols and open source, standardized protocols that they use for discovery. And what's interesting is all of the Dahua devices will respond to the Dahua information protocol, DHIP, even if they are not branded Dahua, right? So you can download the Dahua DHIP app on your phone and run it, and suddenly your cameras that aren't labeled Dahua will start responding to this, these probes, which is like, oh, okay, that maybe those are Dahua kind of things, which is fun.
So explain to me a little bit more about this discovery protocol, particularly the proprietary ones.
Yeah, so there's been, with the advent of IoT and everything's a computer now, your refrigerator, your microwave, your washing machine, there's been this huge push to make them configurable and standardized on the network using protocols that anybody can talk to. They want to be able to be configured remotely and talk to the internet. In fact, some of them will even do nice things like punch holes in your firewall, which we had a nice discussion about that on our blog the other day. But these discovery protocols are designed because these are pieces of consumer technology, and they want consumers to use them. So they want to make it easy to show up on your phone and look how high tech they are. And they don't want to, long gone are the days where they expect you to laboriously type in an IP address on the printer's front panel, or flip some dip switches or something like that. So or just have a static IP address that is always there that just conflicts with everything. So now they've got these discovery and configuration protocols, and a lot of them for discovery are fairly standard. Like multicast DNS is almost universally supported. UPnP, quite popular. But for configuration, the protocols tend to be a lot more proprietary. And these proprietary protocols will also give a lot more detailed information in some cases. So like I was saying with Dahua, they have the HIP, And then Hikvision has their own called oh, I forgot what Hikvision's protocol is called. It is called SADP, which is the something something discovery protocol. But these protocols provide a mechanism for discovery of these devices, and often a way of configuring them that just wouldn't be available with something like MDNS. And these protocols are one of my joys. One of the things I really enjoy doing is reverse engineering these protocols so that I can send out probe packets myself without relying on a third party tool. And it's amazing what you find when you do that.
So to abstract it, to make it friendly for everybody, if you buy, say, an LG washing machine and you download the LG app and it says, oh, now you can configure your load on your phone, but you also have an LG refrigerator. Do you want to connect that as well? Would that be an example of a discovery protocol?
Exactly. And yes, it's interesting use of the word control there, but yes, absolutely.
And then just imagining, there are like these 4 different companies like Dahua and Huawei.
So a lot of these cameras are what you would get for home security, which there's been just an absolute explosion of home cameras recently. I remember, thinking it was so weird that my friends were like, "Oh, I've got cameras on every corner of my house," and now that's almost common. Spoiler alert: if you see the movie Weapons, that's a major plot point. But a lot of these devices are also industrial and prosumer and designed for outdoor use, heavy weather use, secure use, monitoring businesses and gates. And in fact, a lot of them will even integrate with things like door controllers and gate controllers and people counters, which is a whole class of technology that will actually use facial recognition and AI and say, hey, this is, this person came in, the same person left, 2 people came in, but only one left going out, and that's a whole other fascinating piece of technology that a lot of these devices integrate with.
So I imagine these were designed for consumers and others to use them in a positive sense. But I'm wondering if Rob's imagining that there's also nefarious purposes as well.
I mean, it's definitely, that's part of it, the nice part. But the reason why a lot of these devices are banned in government networks is simply because the powers that be are worried about how much control these companies and these vendors can have in known secure or supposed to be secure environments. We don't, I'm not going to say that we have any evidence because I don't think we do, but theoretically speaking, something nefarious could happen with sending out a software update that, sure, it improves the code, but also it adds a little bit of surveillance tech that maybe you don't know about. So it's, I don't want to say that it's, I don't want to impugn anybody, but yes, there's a little bit of nefarious potential there, I suppose.
So here we're just assuming good intent by having the vendor push out a code for you and update the device for you. You don't actually have to run around on Patch Saturday and catch all of your electronic devices.
Good intent is not necessarily the right word. I'm assuming consumer convenience. And also, by the way, you should patch all your IoT devices. When was the last time you checked to make sure your printer was running the latest firmware? It's maybe not ever.
And that's been the IoT problem. It's stuff that businesses are kind of good at. Well, consumers are really bad at it. So great, I can turn on my dishwasher remotely with my app, but it's like, by the same token, how long has that software been running and when was the last time I updated it? Like, nobody thinks in those terms.
So. What was it? I'm flying at 35,000 feet, but thanks to the wonders of technology, I'm annoying my family by making my car horn beep in the garage. It's like, exactly. It's great.
So going back to white labeling in businesses, having these prohibited devices, there are consequences for businesses that are unaware that they have these devices in their organization.
I am not a lawyer, so don't take anything I say as legal advice. But these devices, it can put contracts with federal business or government public business entities in jeopardy. You can face fines. You could face, up to including, I guess, contract cancellation if you can't prove that the environments that you're using are free of these vendors. And we even had a famous example I like to give was runZero in, I can't remember where it was, but it insisted that there was, we were absolutely sure that there was in fact a banned vendor at this site. And everyone was like, no, there's not. We've checked. We've looked everywhere. We've looked everywhere. There is a banned vendor on this network. And the guy was like, if we don't find this soon, if either you've got a bug or something else is going on. Anyway, in the vendor's pocket was a phone from a banned vendor that had connected to the Wi-Fi. So the call was coming from inside the house.
So this is actually a part of a regular security assessment. It's one of the things that would be scoped into that assignment.
Yep, indeed. And it's generally considered part of the due diligence before you enter one of these contracts.
And that's where you attest that your network is free of these devices and the contract goes forward. I noticed that there was no grandfathering of these devices. It's pretty strict in terms of the laws that are out there today. It's like if you have them anywhere, they must be removed.
For a lot of them, yes. And in at least one of the provincial governments in Canada, they did give a, no going forward, but the ones that were there were okay, but that was the exception. All the other ones I read about were definitely, nope, these must be removed by this date or else.
And that's a problem with this whole IoT continuum, and that is that there's billions and billions of devices out there, and it's been out there for a while. So suddenly you've got to rein in these devices. And sometimes these devices are pretty dumb. Like they don't have a lot of memory and they don't share a lot of information. You physically have to go and check them out.
Yes, it is. I take it personally if there's a device on your network or a service on your network that I can't fingerprint. And I really do. Like I get mad. I'm like, no. I've never, we've never seen this before, but by the end of today, I'm going to tell you exactly what it is or die trying. So right. It's a lot of fun. We can detect any piece of software that's listening on a network socket. We will try to identify that software. Any device that's on the network, including stuff that speaks relatively esoteric protocols or even tries to kind of hide itself, we try really hard to detect it. We also will detect devices that are acting as network bridges. So, there's the famous example of the aquarium pump in the casino where their network was completely locked down and everything was secure, but then they brought in a smart aquarium pump and connected it to the Wi-Fi, and it was bridging the public network with the secure network, and attackers were actually able to ransomware a casino by going through the aquarium pump. And runZero can say, oh, by the way, did you know this device is acting as a router? You should probably look at that.
It's funny. For years, people in IoT have cited this one example to me, yet there's only one brief mention in Darktrace's Global Threat Report back in 2017. And that report is now offline. So there's very little documentation that this event actually occurred. And yet I haven't found anyone who can provide any information beyond one or two sentences that was in that report. I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying that for the last 10 years, you'd think there'd be more detail about this one event, since it gets cited everywhere.
Right. Although it is incredible, like, why do smart light bulbs act as routers? They really shouldn't be doing that, but they... And then one that our illustrious founder, H.D. Moore, has brought up a few times that I think is really interesting is even people, in the industry, they don't realize that oftentimes certain bits of tooling, like if you're running, a large number of containers or I'm sorry, any number of containers on your laptop, or, you're running some virtual machine software or something, oftentimes those configurations will turn your laptop into a router because they want to be able to route to those machines, but they don't say only route on this one local interface because they want to be able to talk to the rest of the world or whatever. And so suddenly your router becomes a bridge. Your laptop becomes a router and a bridge between potentially many networks.
Rob mentioned Wireshark, and I have something on my phone called Fing, and it allows me to fingerprint networks wherever I am. And I love going into public spaces and just seeing who's connecting and what they're connecting and how they're labeling these things.
I will tell you that it is the most fun you can have at a coffee shop to open up Wireshark. And I recommend anybody do it, even if you're not really interested, just to see how the sausage is made. It's the amount you'll learn just by kind of watching it flow by is amazing. Years and years ago, for several years, I taught a class on network forensics. And, we would have people come into the class and they never even heard of Wireshark. Some of them didn't even understand. And I don't want to make this sound like you should just, nobody's born understanding this. But they came to this class with no foreknowledge of even the concept of like packet oriented communication, like, breaking things up into packets and then sending them across the wire or the ether or whatever. And by the end, they were like, "This is great. I can see exactly how it works, and I'm going to go home and I'm going to run Wireshark on everything." And I was like, "Yes, yes, I have succeeded." Lots of fun.
So neither of us are lawyers, but the look but don't touch rule, you can look at these packets, right? You can glean something from them. You just can't alter them or touch them.
In a lot of networks, the packets are just there anyway. It's not like you're doing anything wrong. Your computer's receiving them kind of sort of anyway in a lot of cases and then just dropping them. So just opening up Wireshark, again, I'm not a lawyer, but really there should be no harm. We have gotten, as an industry, better about trying to make things encrypted by default, zero trust by default, and all that. But there's still an immense amount of traffic out there that is unencrypted, and you can just see information flying across the wire. And with the advent of all this, these IoT devices who want to be discovered, right? They want to be easy to connect to. There's just a regular pulse of discovery traffic going out saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm here. MDNS advertisements. Hey, look at me. I'm here to be connected to and printed with, or whatever this device is." So even if we've started encrypting most traffic, the IoT wave has made discovery so much more popular, so much easier. And then also, if you get into these sort of, I don't want to say like retail, but if you go to like a place of business, oftentimes, a coffee shop doesn't have a dedicated IT staff, right? And so a cash register is probably not going to be set up once and never updated again. Right. Or you have a contractor that only comes out once a quarter or something. And so these devices often have some very interesting bits and bobs running on them. And you can even see things flying across, like you may not, hopefully it's encrypted, but you can still see things like, the cash register is very talkative now. Somebody's running a job or something, which I think is fun. And then also just host names like, "Oh, I now know that the guy sitting over there must be named John because there's a device on the network named John's iPhone." So a little bit of PII just sitting there for the taking.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've done. It's like, "Oh, you've named all your devices. How convenient. I know who you are. I know exactly what device you're holding in your hand at this moment." In Rob's talk, he talks a little bit about SS7. We don't hear much about SS7 anymore.
Yep. And yeah, SS7, man, that's wow. Thanks for the memories. I've totally never done anything illegal with the phone network ever. And that's my story and I'm sticking to it. Anyway, yes, so SIP, which is the session initiation protocol, is what's used to control voice over IP calls in most situations. And I remember this was in the early 2000s. Wired or some other tech publication said, "Oh, by the 2030s, 50% of phone calls will be going over an IP network." And I was like, "That's never going to happen. That's impossible." And of course, now everything is voice over IP. And so SIP is interesting in that it will, if you're talking to a SIP endpoint, it will tell you quite a bit about the device. Can tell you quite a bit about the device that it's running on. So a lot of these potentially banned vendors will have interesting SIP headers like, "Oh, it's the Dahua SIP server" or whatever. So there's yet another way of potentially identifying these devices.
But what are these devices using SIP for? I've got a web server. Why not just go with that?
So a lot of them are also intercoms. So if you want to talk to somebody over there at the gate, that's often set up using SIP. And then sort of related protocol, RTSP, the real-time streaming protocol, is what's often used for shipping video data and audio data back from a camera or capture device to a recorder. If you see your washing machine running RTSP, yes, I would start asking questions.
One of the cool things about digital fingerprinting is that you can find regional variations. For example, it's the same device except the firmware has differences because of local regulations or requirements. That allows somebody like Rob to look for the oddities, the needles in the haystacks, that one device that doesn't belong in your country.
So yeah, so one of the things that we did was scan the entire internet, at least the entire IPv4 space, which again, if you had told me in 1997 you're going to be scanning the entire internet to look for things, I would have laughed in your face. But nope, it's something that I get to do for fun now, and I get paid for it.
So I'm going to stop Rob right there. I've talked to a lot of people that have scanned the internet before, IPv4. And when you're saying that you're going to do a scan, are you looking at a particular port? Or are you looking at a particular service? How are you calling it a scan?
For this case, we're looking at specific pieces of information, SNMP, Telnet banners, things like that. And yes, people still do. Some devices do run Telnet in 2025. That's always fun.
And how long did that scan take? Say, just looking at Telnet.
So to be polite, you don't want to scan because you don't want to upset A, whoever's hosting the scan, and B, you don't want to be rude and just hammer a bunch of IP spaces. You also want to try to kind of spread the love a little bit, and don't do things sequentially, because if you hit a bunch of IPs in the same in sequence, you might bump into you might exhaust a small router's state table or something. Be nice. But you can scan the entire internet, picking your speed in 48 hours if you want to be super slow, which is, again, just mind-boggling to me.
So Rob says he was scanning the internet.
Right. So one of the things that I wanted to learn about with these white label devices is it's not necessarily white labeled in this case, but different regional versions of the same product. So a lot of vendors will have a specific version of their firmware for a specific market. One of my favorite stories there was a tool way back in the day called HP OpenView. And it was a network management discovery piece of software. It was super cool. And in the background of the main sort of interface was a world map. And the world map just had all the countries colored in different shades of gray. And they had to have a special release of this software specifically for the People's Republic of China, because the island of Taiwan was a slightly different shade of gray in the worldwide release. And you cannot possibly imply what that implies. So special version of software there. Different countries, different polities will have different regulatory requirements, including the strength of encryption, or theoretically speaking, whether there's a backdoor enabled or not. And so what I wanted to do was see if we could form some sort of clustering of here's interesting versions of software in different parts of the world. This version or this telltale sign seems to be highly correlated with this particular region or location. And so what we found was it's pretty interesting that you can see that there's a strong correlation for some devices. For example, in Cisco iOS, there are 51, and this is just what's publicly visible on the internet, obviously. There are 51 distinct versions of Cisco iOS visible in Canada on the public internet, whereas in the Russian Federation, there's 282 distinct versions. But even though there's 282 distinct versions, Russia still has one version that makes up the plurality, whereas it's much more fragmented in Canada, right? But what this can tell you is if you see a version, you see a telltale sign of firmware that's extremely common in one location and then only pops up once or twice somewhere else in the world, what does that mean? And what that usually means is you potentially bought something off eBay and had it shipped to you, or somebody moved from, Indonesia to the United States, right? One of the things we found that was interesting is there's a very, very common version of MikroTik Router OS that seems to be handed out by some ISP in Indonesia. And so they're just everywhere in Indonesia, the specific version of MikroTik. There's only one instance of that version in all of Canada. Now, MikroTik's not super popular in Canada to begin with, but there's several thousand that you can see on the public internet, but only one instance of this thing that's extremely popular in Indonesia. So what does that mean? It means either somebody moved from Indonesia to Canada and took their router with them, or somebody in Canada ordered a router off of eBay or somewhere else, and it was shipped from Indonesia. And, you might say, oh, that's just an interesting bit of trivia, and, maybe it is. But because of these regulatory requirements, because of the different update cycles that different regions get, that router might not get updates. That router might have a configuration option that isn't available or doesn't have something that you need for regulatory compliance in your country. Certain encryption algorithms, certain pieces of protocol support, default settings, things like that. And so it's just something to be mindful of, that, okay, this piece of hardware or this piece of software is different. And that's, things that are different on your network are always things that should be investigated.
So it could be like geofenced or something where it doesn't get updates if it's outside of its home country.
Potentially, yeah. And we have, one of the things we have in runZero it's one of my favorite features, and it's such a small thing in terms of the UI, right? But every asset has an outlier score. So if you're looking at your network in runZero and you can say, oh, here's all my assets, and if you reach a certain number and there's a certain bit of mathematical chicanery, there's a large enough sample size to make this chicanery possible, assets will get an outlier score that say, okay, this asset is extremely different on this one dimension from everything else. Why is that the case? And sometimes it's obvious. It's like everything in your network is running this version of Windows, but this one is running not that version of Windows. So does that mean you missed an update or something like that? But sometimes it's more subtle, like the default TCP window size on this system seems different from every other system. That seems weird. Why is your TCP stack acting odd? You should really look into that. So,
I'd like to thank Rob King for coming on the show and talking about fingerprinting devices that are out there, particularly the white label devices that you know are on your network, but you don't know who actually created them and whether they're getting the updates that they need. Hey, if you're enjoying Error Code, tell a friend. I'm sure there are other people out there who like narrative information security podcasts. And I'd really like to hear from you. Go to errorcodepodcast.com to get more details. And tell me what you like, and even what you don't. I've got some great episodes coming up. We'll have more on Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, and hacking utilities supply chains. Subscribe today. I don't want you to miss out.